I can't hang out any longer, man. We need to get some shelter.
Did see a cabin when I was doing my scout earlier. It's just a little ways that way. It's creepy over there, and it's right next to the woods, but at least we have a windbreak.
In the heart of the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness, a place where technology falters and even satellites struggle to penetrate, 8 of the world's most elite operators were about to face something beyond their training. They thought it would be just another routine mission, until the eerie quiet of the forest began to feel suffocating. Strange sounds, unsettling movements, and an oppressive sense of being watched slowly gnawed at their nerves. But when they ventured deeper, something shifted. This wasn't just a mission. Something was out there, just beyond the trees, lurking in the shadows. The further they went, the stronger the feeling grew. What they would uncover could only be described in one word: terrifying. The snowy mystery of Alaska's forest. Welcome back to the Cryptid Report. The search for cryptids has always been a journey filled with uncertainty, danger, and a fair share of skepticism. For centuries, people have ventured into the unknown, chasing stories of vampires, werewolves, chupacabras, mermaids, the Loch Ness Monster, and creatures that exist only in folklore. It's almost amusing how the human brain is always captivated by things he cannot understand, and creatures he cannot comprehend, often becoming obsessed with what lies beyond his grasp. But what if these tales aren't just stories? What if there's more truth behind them than most people are willing to admit? While many dismiss these creatures as pure myth, there are still a few brave souls who dare to believe, determined to uncover the secrets hiding in the shadows of our world. As we dive into one of the most intriguing encounters of this kind, we're reminded that the line between myth and reality is often blurrier than we think. Could it be that some legends are actually rooted in something real? The search for the truth continues, often in places where no one else dares to look. In the early months of 1994, a special operations team embarked on a routine training mission deep in the Alaskan wilderness. Little did they know, they were about to stumble upon something straight out of legend, something that would change everything they thought they knew about the wild. They set out with one mission in mind, to master strategic reconnaissance, but instead, they were about to become part of one of the most mysterious stories in modern cryptozoology. At the time, the team was focused on their objective, mastering the art of sneaking into a target area, observing quietly, and exiting undetected. But everything took an unexpected turn when they came across something they could never have anticipated. What they discovered was so unsettling that they had no choice but to retreat back to base in a hurry. But before diving into what they saw, let's take a moment to consider how prepared they were for this mission. They had the right gear: cross-country skis to navigate the snow-covered terrain, backpacks loaded with tents, food, and clothing to survive the harsh conditions. With everything they needed, they felt ready to tackle the journey from Fairbanks, heading east past Eisen Air Force Base, through some of the most challenging landscapes imaginable. Their route wasn't an easy one. The rugged terrain included steep bridges, deep valleys, marshy land, and thick forests. As the team pushed forward, they eventually found themselves in an especially dense part of the wilderness. It's in moments like these, when you're deep in the wild, that you realize just how unpredictable nature can be. Miles, the captain, was determined to ensure the team's safety, so he made the decision to scout ahead. As he navigated the thick brush, he hoped to either find a safer route or confirm that they could press on through this obstacle. That's when it happened. Amid the snow and silence, they came across something that stopped them dead in their tracks. Footprints, unlike anything they had ever seen before. The prints were massive, about 18 to 19 inches long, spaced around 5 feet apart. For a moment, they couldn't believe their eyes. What sort of creature could leave such enormous tracks? After all, this was no ordinary footprint. It moved in a way that was almost efficient, cutting through the snow like a predator on the hunt. But one thing was clear. These tracks weren't made by a human. One soldier, eager to replicate the pattern and figure it out, tried to step in the same place, only to sink comically to his knees, proving once again that nature doesn't play by human rules. It was a defining moment. The team now had a mystery on their hands, one they weren't prepared for. These footprints suggested something big, something fast, something that could move through deep snow without leaving a trace of human vulnerability. The tracks had a certain grace to them, a silent swiftness that hinted at a creature perfectly adapted to its environment. With curiosity piqued, the team called in their sergeant, the best tracker among them. He took one look at the footprints, analyzed the depth and the stride, and immediately began estimating the size of whatever creature had made them. The numbers were staggering. Based on the tracks, they believed the creature was around 9 feet tall, with an estimated weight between 500 and 700 pounds. This was something far beyond just a large animal. This was truly extraordinary and utterly terrifying. And despite their extensive training, they could not deny that they were looking at something completely unnatural. So, what now? The team, not willing to let this mystery slip away, decided to follow the tracks deeper into the forest. As they trekked forward, it became clear that they were dealing with something that had mastered the art of evading humans. The footprints led them along ridges, weaving through the trees, never leaving the kind of clues that might have revealed its true nature. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to know exactly how to stay hidden, how to move through the dense forest without detection. What started as just an ordinary wildlife encounter soon turned into the beginning of a strange journey, one that would challenge their perceptions of the natural world and leave them wondering if they had just crossed paths with a creature thought to be mere legend. As they continued on, the questions only multiplied. What was out there? Was it truly as elusive and powerful as the footprints suggested? And perhaps most chilling of all, what would happen if they got too close? A silent stalker in the wild. As the team pressed on, their journey took them deeper into the rugged Alaskan wilderness. The tracks they were following told them something truly astonishing. This creature seemed to know the land almost as well as they did. It wasn't just moving through the terrain, it was actively avoiding detection, employing tactics the team had only just learned to master. The realization that they were not dealing with a mere animal, but something far more intelligent, fueled their determination. This was no longer just about following strange footprints. It had become a race to uncover the secrets of a creature that was possibly more cunning than they could have imagined. This wasn't just a random animal. It was strategizing, using its surroundings to its advantage. And as they got deeper into the woods, the team couldn't help but feel that the creature was intentionally evading them, keeping its distance in a way that suggested intelligence. That realization only sparked their curiosity more. What kind of animal could move like this? So, with that mystery hanging in the air, the team pressed on, determined to solve the puzzle. But of course, the pursuit wasn't going to be easy. The snow ahead was thick, making each step a struggle. It was almost as if the wilderness itself was trying to stop them. The deep snow made every move harder than the last, and despite their determination, progress slowed to a crawl. Still, they were prepared. With their skis and snowshoes, they tackled the treacherous terrain, inching forward hour by hour. The snow was no match for their gear, and with it, they found themselves able to push through, hour after hour, keeping their focus on the hunt. As the hours passed, though, it became clear that daylight was slipping away faster than they had hoped. Soon, the forest grew darker, the shadows growing longer, a reminder that they couldn't track forever. The team realized it was time to stop and set up camp. They found a flat spot, cleared their area and began the familiar routine of preparing their meals and getting ready for the night. After all the exhaustion from the day's trek, everyone was ready to rest, or so they thought. Around 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., the world outside seemed to settle into a peaceful stillness. The team fell into a deep sleep, their bodies finally getting the rest they had been craving. But the night had other plans. Just as the clock ticked toward 4 a.m., Miles shot up from his sleeping bag, wide-eyed, his heart racing. Something was wrong. A howl, or maybe a roar, broke through the silence of the night, sending a chill down his spine. It was unlike anything he'd ever heard before. Miles wasn't the only one awake now. His entire team had been stirred by the eerie sound. But what was it? At first, Miles tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a lone wolf. After all, wolves were a common sight in the Alaskan wilderness. But this sound, it was different. It was deeper, more guttural than any wolf's howl. And it wasn't the usual pack call. It was as if this thing was trying to say something. Miles stayed up, trying to listen, but no answers came, only more unsettling silence. The howl eventually stopped, but the quiet didn't last long. Barely 15 minutes later, it came again. This time, it was closer, much closer. Miles froze, his pulse racing as the sound seemed to move toward them. At first, it was faint, like a whisper in the wind, but then it grew louder and louder until it was undeniable. Something, someone, was out there, and it wasn't just passing by. By now, the fear that had crept into Miles's chest was unmistakable. Was it a bear? It didn't seem likely. Bears were deep in hibernation by now, with the snow that had fallen and the cold setting in. But if they had disturbed a bear's den, things could get ugly quickly. Miles couldn't afford to let his team panic. He had to hold it together, stay calm, but that was getting harder by the second. He silently hoped it was just a wolf, maybe even a big one. After all, wolves did roam this area. But the thought that this might be something bigger and more dangerous was hard to shake. And just when Miles thought the sound might fade, it didn't. Instead, it stopped suddenly, only about 100 feet away. His heart pounded in his chest. The creature was close, too close. The silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Miles couldn't help but feel the tension in the air, thick with the weight of anticipation. The rest of the team began to stir, waking up to the unsettling quiet that had taken over the camp. No one said anything, but everyone was on edge. What was out there? What had they disturbed in the dark? The sounds of the wilderness had stopped entirely, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it felt like the creature was just waiting. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie calm behind. In that stillness, Miles knew the creature was still there. It hadn't left. It was just biding its time. He could feel it, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to make its move. But what was it? What had they stumbled upon in these woods? Was it a predator, a guardian of the wilds, or something else entirely? Miles could only guess, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. And then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the silence deepened. The creature was pacing. Miles could feel it, though he couldn't see it. Every inch of him screamed that they weren't alone. They were being watched, studied, and hunted. How could he protect his team when he didn't even know what they were facing? The night felt long, like it might never end, and that creature in the dark was always just out of reach. Fear in the heart of Alaska. The sound of something moving back and forth in the dark had a sinister edge to it. Was this the creature's way of deciding the fate of the men it had been watching? The rustling noises echoed through the forest, and while it kept its distance, the tension was thick enough to wake the whole team from their sleep. Miles and a few of the guys who had been keeping an eye on the situation while the others rested were the first to notice the unsettling noises. Eventually, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. The rustling ceased, and just like that, the forest became unnervingly still. Now, there was nothing, not even the usual chorus of crickets or frogs filling the night air. In a place like this, silence is terrifying. This eerie quiet didn't last long, though. Out of nowhere, a howl broke the silence, and then it morphed into a roar, one that would make anyone's blood run cold. It wasn't just any roar either. Some of the men later claimed it almost sounded like a scream. But that terrifying noise was just the start of their nightmare. Miles and his men had no idea what was to come, and they sure didn't expect it to escalate this fast. Soon they were wishing they had live ammo, but of course, that wasn't possible. The nature of their mission had led them into the snow-covered wilderness, and there wasn't anything they could do about it. With each passing minute, the situation seemed more and more impossible. It became clear that this mission could turn deadly fast. Eventually, the team realized they had no choice but to abandon it before one of them ended up seriously hurt, or worse. But just as they were wrestling with that decision, another sound snapped them back to reality, the gut-churning noise of a tree being ripped from its roots. The sound echoed through the forest as it crashed to the ground, and there was no mistaking it. This was no ordinary animal. They saw the massive trees falling, their tops crashing down with a loud snap that resonated deep in their bones. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on them. This was no longer about a simple mission. Despite the fact that dawn was still hours away, the decision was made. They needed to get out. The Alaskan wilderness wasn't just cold, it was unforgiving, and it seemed to be getting more hostile with every passing moment. But before they left, Miles and a few others decided to take a look at the area where they had heard the strange noises earlier. What they discovered didn't make them feel any safer. Large footprints were visible in the snow. Not just any footprints, but ones that matched the ones they'd seen the day before. The creature had been circling their camp, getting closer and closer without them even realizing it. The prints were clear, and what stood out even more was how they were around the spots where the snow had been packed down, as though the creature had been pacing back and forth, observing them. But that wasn't all. They found something else, something that would only add to their dread. A massive pine tree, broken in half at the trunk, around 12 inches thick. The tree had been snapped halfway up its 35-foot height. This couldn't have been the work of any animal they were familiar with. Miles knew this wasn't just an accident. It was a sign that something far more powerful was lurking in the shadows. As unnerving as the strange sounds and broken tree were, the unsettling feeling that gripped Miles and his team was just the beginning of something much larger and far more mysterious. The sight of large, fresh footprints near their camp was enough to turn their unease into full-blown tension. What could have left such massive tracks? And how close had it been to them? To make matters worse, the tree, which had been uprooted with little effort, hinted at a force far beyond anything they'd ever encountered. The men stood frozen in place, their eyes scanning the dark wilderness around them, trying to piece together what had just happened. With every passing second, it became harder to deny. Something big, something powerful, had been stalking them. What made the situation even more terrifying was the creeping sensation that whatever this creature was, it wasn't just passing through, it was following them. The thought of being hunted, with no weapons to defend themselves, made their skin crawl. They were at the mercy of an unknown force, one capable of uprooting a 35-foot tree like it was a twig. The magnitude of that power wasn't lost on them. They weren't just dealing with a bear or wolf. They were facing something far more ominous, something beyond their understanding. In that moment, they realized just how vulnerable they were in the vast, untamed Alaskan wilderness. They could be swallowed up by the forest at any time, and no one would ever know what happened to them. So, what were their options? They could have panicked, maybe even tried to track down whatever had been watching them, but Miles was quick to take charge. He immediately told his team to keep their mouths shut, to avoid drawing any attention to what they'd just witnessed. The last thing they needed was rumors flying around about a creature stalking them in the wilderness. Miles knew that if word got out, it would only fuel wild speculation, maybe even tie their experience to the legendary Bigfoot. He wasn't about to let that happen. What mattered was finishing their mission and getting out of there in one piece. They needed to stay focused and avoid getting distracted by the supernatural possibilities that lingered in the air. Miles was doing more than just being cautious for the sake of professionalism. He was making a conscious decision to maintain control over the situation. In a moment when everything around them screamed uncertainty, his calm leadership was the anchor that kept them grounded. The wilderness was a force of nature in itself, unpredictable and unforgiving, and Miles wasn't about to let it tear apart the mission or his team's resolve. His men followed his lead, silently agreeing that some things were better left unexplained. After all, they were in an environment where the unknown ruled, and they had to respect the boundaries of what they could understand. Poking around could only make things worse. 2 nights later, as the team sat around their campfire, the weight of what they'd experienced still hung over them. The silence was thick, the shadows of the night pressing in on them. They had completed their mission, but the memory of the encounter lingered like a ghost. The men couldn't help but whisper among themselves, speculating about what they had truly encountered. Had it been some kind of cryptid, a creature from local legend? They weren't sure, but one thing was clear. Whatever it was powerful, and it wasn't something they were prepared to face. The men understood that they couldn't afford to let the encounter overshadow their success. They had been professionals, and as much as they were shaken, they couldn't let fear cloud their judgment or derail their mission. As the days passed, the mystery surrounding their experience remained unsolved. Was it Bigfoot or something else entirely? The team would never know for sure, but one thing became evident. They had been reminded of how little control they really had over the wilderness around them. The Alaskan wilderness had a way of revealing just enough to keep the men questioning, never quite providing all the answers they needed. What was out there, lurking in the dark, remained a riddle, and the forces of nature that governed the land were beyond comprehension. In the end, the team learned a valuable lesson. Some mysteries are better left untouched. The power of nature and the unknown creatures that might inhabit it had proven to be more than just a legend. It was a force they couldn't fight, a mystery they couldn't solve, and an experience that would stay with them forever. As their mission came to a close, they left the wilderness with a quiet respect for the untamed land and the forces that ruled it. What they had encountered was beyond human understanding, and they knew that some things were meant to remain that way. The chilling feeling of being watched would linger in their minds long after they left, a constant reminder that the wilds of Alaska still held secrets that no one could fully grasp. But yet, as the team walked away from that eerie encounter, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by something far more powerful than they ever imagined. So, was it Bigfoot or something else entirely? What would you have done in their shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the wild. Thanks for watching.